Brother Ron, and welcome to We All Be News Radio and TV, the news-free Dixie for the 21st century.
And this is R2C2H2, the Artivist, and welcome once again, family, back to We All Be News and Radio. And today's topic is a very touchy one at that, or tonight's topic rather, the shame of a nation, the Emmett Till legacy. It might be what you think, it might not be what you're thinking, but we're going to be talking about the legacy of the murder of Emmett, or the lynching rather, of Emmett Lewis Till almost 54 years ago. Back in August of 1955, we got some very special, insightful, and brilliant guests that are going to be sharing in this dialogue. And hopefully, our purpose is to educate and inform and disseminate information, and also get people to develop their critical thinking skills by doing so. So, without further ado, we got Dr. Linda Beto. Are you there, Dr. Linda?
Oh, yes, I'm here. Good evening.
Good evening. Welcome to We All Be News and Radio. We are so honored to have you on.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Now, Dr. Linda Beto is chair of the Department of Social Sciences at Stillman College in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. She is a very, very brilliant woman doing a lot of very important work. She got a book coming out about the most known unknown, which is The Black Maverick, the title of it, T.R.M. Howard's Fight for Civil Rights and Economic Power. That's a legendary Mississippi freedom fighter, civil rights leader, Dr. T.R.M. Howard. What I would say is probably the definitive book on his life. Very important work. And we welcome you once again to We All Be News and Radio.
Thank you.
And so I know also that since you're doing work about Dr. T.R.M. Howard, that Dr. T.R.M. Howard is one of the main reasons, if not the only reason, that we know about the Emmett Till case. Could you please explain his importance in that case getting known to the nation and the world? And I guess in short, explain to us, or our listeners rather, who was Dr. T.R.M. Howard?
Yes, Dr. Howard was a surgeon in the all-black town of Mound Bayou, Mississippi. And Mound Bayou, Mississippi is not very far from Money, Mississippi, where the Till murder took place. So Dr. Howard, because of his wealth, he had a plantation. He was the chief surgeon of the hospital. When Till's mother came to Mississippi, it was Dr. Howard who kept her at his house. Even the black journalists that came to town, there were no hotels for African Americans during this time. So they stayed at Dr. Howard's mansion. And what's so wonderful about it is that he protected them. He would have this man outside with a sawed-off double-barrel shotgun and say, like, I don't see well, so you better not come to try to hurt anybody. And he always drove a new Cadillac. He had a new one every year. And so, but he did not want to take her to the trial in that, because he didn't want to put her life in danger. So she would always go to the courthouse in a different vehicle. So not only did he get her into Mississippi and back out safely, he also went around trying to find witnesses that had seen and heard and knew of what had gone on with the Till, and trying to get them to the courthouse in order to testify. But of course, the sheriff wouldn't have that. But we found out in our research that a couple of the guys that they thought had been on the back of the truck had disappeared. During this time, they were probably arrested in some faraway jail, so nobody could find them at the time. And Dr. Howard, he did more than just protect blacks. He fought Jim Crow. One of his plans, during the time, blacks couldn't go to a bathroom and use it. If they stopped at a gas station, they couldn't gas up, pay for the gas, and use the restroom. And so he had a campaign on tags on the cars: do not buy gas where you can't use the bathroom. And it went over really well. It was very successful because he found he was a member of the board of the Memphis, Tennessee, the Tri-State Bank.
Mm-hmm.
So blacks would pool that money and put it in Tri-State Bank and not, spend money there in the area. So the whites of the town started losing business. And, of course, they had to build an outdoor toilet or some place for blacks during the 1950s to use the bathroom when they stopped to gas up their car. So he was very successful in that. One quick note before I quiet down and let you ask me another question, and that is the famed civil rights leader, Medgar Evers. It was Dr. Howard who gave Medgar his first job out of college. He and Merle Evers worked for Dr. Howard. He had an insurance company, and as Medgar would go selling door-to-door selling insurance, he would encourage people to register to vote.
Oh, that's amazing right there. I guess you could tell how strong a tree is by the fruit it bears. And Dr. T.R. Howard was a strong tree, it seems, in civil rights and Mississippi politics in general. And I also like the fact that when you talk about Dr. T.R. Howard, he goes against the prototype of what people think about the movement as being one of nonviolent. And kind of sometimes people think of it as being very passive. And people, black folks were not defending themselves, or that, it didn't really become a movement until the white college students came down from the north back in '64, where it was like, most of the white folks doing all the organizing. We had a guy like this, like Dr. T.R. Howard, was not only very proactive, was very adept at organizing and seeing things through.
Oh, absolutely. He did a lot for blacks in Mississippi. He built the first swimming pool for children there in Mount Bayou, Mississippi. He had some unconventional ways in the hospital, like if he did surgery, he would also hand the patients seeds so that they could plant food and feed themselves. When some of them would lose their jobs because they were registering to vote, he would find ways to help them make ends meet. People like Charles Evers had gone north to work, and they were sending money back to Mississippi to care for the people who were putting their lives on the line so that we could have the right to vote. Dr. Howard was a magnificent man in a lot of ways, even though, with every strong person, they may have some dark shadows.
Of course.
I don't want to tell the whole book because I love for the listeners to buy it. It's an exciting read. But he believed in economic self-help. He believed in working and making money and pulling yourself up and then giving back to the community. So he was he believed in benevolence. He believed in self-help. He believed in business and enterprise, and that's something we don't hear a lot about. We don't hear a lot about minorities owning their own businesses and creating wealth like the Oprah Winfreys. And I think this goes back to, a time that most of our students don't know that there were African Americans out there, millionaires during the 50s.
I mean, that's awesome. But also, I would the book is called Black Maverick, correct? What's the title of the book, and how can people get access to this title? Is it out on the shelves yet in the stores?
Not on the shelves yet, but the publishers are taking orders as we speak. The title of the book is Black Maverick, T.R.M. Howard's Fight for Civil Rights and Economic Power. It's the University of Illinois Press that has the book. So you can go online at www.press.uillinois.edu. Again, www.press.uillinois.edu.
Well, thank you for that, because we got the switchboard lighting up. This is a very hot topic. We got other feature guests. I see area code 601. I know it's Dr. Young. Dr. Young, I see you. Please hang on, hold on, and keep the faith. But we're going to get to our other feature guest, Brother Devery Johnson. Devery Anderson.
Yes.
Devery, how you doing? I said your name correctly?
You did.
All right, good.
I'm doing well. How are you?
It's awesome, man. It's an honor. I'm fine. I feel better. It's an honor to have both of you guys on, or guy and women on. This is Brother Devery Anderson. He's like one of the world's foremost experts on the Emmett Till case. He really dedicated a decade and some years of his life to the study of this case, breaking it down. A very brilliant website that he created is the EmmettTillMurder.com. Go to EmmettTillMurder.com. If you want to know anything and everything about this case, and he's coming with his own book about the case, probably the most definitive book to date that he's working on. So I'd like to applaud you, my brother, for doing the things that you're doing, and I really, really, thoroughly enjoyed perusing your website.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And yes, it's been a big portion of my life since 1994, I guess, is when I first discovered the case, and I've been researching it ever since. And I think it was about 3 or 4 years after I started reading about the case myself that I decided I wanted to really pursue this further and write a book on the subject.
So I'll ask you this, like, I know you said all of that, but how does a white guy from Salt Lake City, Utah, get interested in the case that happened in the Mississippi Delta so many years ago?
Yes, that's a good question. I think initially it was because I had always had a strong interest in Black history, in slavery, the Jim Crow era, segregation, and civil rights. And as I've studied some of the other cases that are familiar to people, I think, when you think of the civil rights movement, you think of Rosa Parks, and you think of Dr. Martin Luther King. There are so many others that I had never heard of. And when I first came across the Emmett Till case, I was watching the PBS documentary series called Eyes on the Prize. The first 15 minutes of that series is dedicated to the Emmett Till case in the episode called Awakenings, where it was really talking about what prompted or what got the civil rights movement going initially. And the Emmett Till case was featured in that early time. And I was shocked because as I watched the segment about the case, learning what had happened to this 14-year-old boy and learning that these men got away with murder, I was shocked at the killing itself and the aftermath, but I was more shocked that I had never heard of this case. I couldn't believe that I hadn't, but then as I asked other people about it, right after that, I went to the library. I wanted to learn more, and I was a student at the time, and so I was asking my professors and others about this. Nobody else had heard of it either, and I think I was just mainly shocked at first that I had never heard of it, and because of that, that's what prompted me to want to learn more. But yeah, Salt Lake City probably wasn't the best spot to find more information or to find others who knew much about the case. I took a class on American racism 2 years later, and asked the class how many people had heard of Emmett Till. It was a full class, half black, I would say, half white, and the only people who had heard of Emmett Till at that point in the fall of 1996 was the professor and myself. And so others still hadn't heard of it at that point either, and it was just shocking to me. I realized this case needed to be known. Emmett Till needed to be a name just like Dr. Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks and others, Medgar Evers and others.
I mean, I just commend you on that work because it's a very comprehensive site. Basically, anything you want to know about Emmett Till that's accessible through the internet is on your website. And I know it took a labor of love to do that. So I'm very, excited when I see somebody who's very excited about what they're passionate about, sharing and relating that passion to others, so it can be very accessible. And that this thing is, like you said, it should be better known. In this case, it was very pivotal in turning the civil rights movement. I remember I read somewhere about Rosa Parks, and I guess to paraphrase her, one of the reasons why she didn't want to move out their seat because she thought about what happened to Emmett Till several months earlier that year.
Yes, absolutely. In fact, Dr. Howard was invited to Montgomery, and she said she heard him speak just a couple of days, I think it was about 3 days before the bus boycott.
That's awesome. So all this stuff is interrelated. And I got a special guest on the line. He's been waiting patiently to give in his insights because I think it's very important. Dr. Young, are you there?
Hey, yes, I'm here, Ron. Good evening.
Good evening. It's an honor to have you on, sir. So what do you think about all this?
I'm calling as a student of history tonight because when I read earlier your website about the doctor from Stillman, what's her name?
Dr. Linda Beto.
Okay, well, and then I saw T.R.M. Howard, and I associated Howard with maybe the Alabama movement. And then when she said something about Mount Bayou, and then I said, wait a minute, Medgar, it's something about Medgar's connection with Mount Bayou. Yeah, I had the pleasure of knowing Medgar Wiley Evers when I was growing up here in Jackson, Mississippi, and for sure Medgar did work what was it, Magnolia Mutual? It was an insurance company there about Dr. Howard, and one of the things that Mega did do was help look into the lynchings of Emmett Till, and also, as the doctor from Stillman said, that he tried to get people to register and to vote. And a lot of folk don't realize it. Before James Meredith successfully integrated the University of Mississippi, Mega had applied 9 years before. So I'm glad this story is being told, and I'm definitely enjoying hearing this story, because here in Mississippi, a lot of people, we were young, and a lot of people didn't know the full history of it. And I had the pleasure, Ron, of meeting Mrs. Mamie Till Mosley and her late husband, Gene Mosley, when they were in Memphis one time, and it's definitely a story that needs to be told. I definitely do. So I'm going to just sit back quietly and just cut off my telephone and listen to the radio show so I can get educated more on it.
Well, Dr. Young, you know you was a part of the movement, so I'm just honored to have you on and listening. I think it's very vital that people who was there see the value of what we're trying to do tonight.
Yeah, and the gentleman from Salt Lake City, Utah, I was at Jackson State when the students got killed there, and one of the things that kind of caught me, a lot of people know about what happened at Kent State University, but very few people recall what happened at Jackson State just a few days later. So I'm interested, definitely interested in why he's so passionate about this as well.
We definitely going to get through that by the end of this hour, definitely.
Okay. I'm going to enjoy listening to the show, Ron.
Dr. Young, thank you. And the words of Duke Ellington, we love you madly.
Thank you, and thank both of your guests.
Oh, definitely. It's an honor. It's a blessing. And I like to get back to the fact that, we got to put this stuff in context. Like, how did this happen? I want to ask both of you how, something like this can happen. Because, I know I was talking to Dr. Whitaker. I had the honor of talking to Dr. Whitaker over the weekend. And I read his thesis. And I thought about, how we take voting so lightly today. Until recently, we took it so lightly. And the thing about 50-something years ago in Tallahatchie County, he had 10,000, voting age black folks that were not registered to vote. And then you have this trial come along. That, if you were not registered to vote, that means you could not be, put in the jury selection pool. So, you deprive people of their right to trial by jury, their access to the ballot. You depriving people of a lot of things, because what he was relaying to me was the fact that, hey, if you didn't vote, you didn't matter. They won't fix your roads or give you better housing or education if you didn't try to vote to put the right people in. And I know we made reference to Charles Evers, and had the honor of talking to him several months ago. He was talking about how, the thing about it was, until we changed the folks that represented us in politics, we couldn't really change anything in Mississippi. So I'd like to get y'all insight about how it was back in those times, or something like this can happen with the Emmett Till case.
Well, I guess I'll go first. First of all, you have to think about the culture of the time. It's a different day. It was a different day back then. And when you talk about people putting their life on the line for something they believe in, they wanted to be seen and counted as a human being, as an individual. And that was one thing that Dr. Howard was very good at doing. Wherever he went, you knew when he walked into the room. He was always dressed, immaculately dressed, with trench coats, shoes to match. So people would see the best in the Southern Negro, because that's what they called them, Negroes. Dr. Howard was born in Kentucky, but the young man said, thought it was a Howard from Alabama. He actually went to Oakwood College in Alabama. He graduated from Oakwood in Alabama before he went on to get his medical degree. So, and he saw a lot. He saw the remnants of lynching and killings, and to carry that throughout his work. So it wasn't like some of our leaders come from, let's say Dr. King. He didn't come from poor tobacco twisters like Dr. Howard did. Dr. Howard had to make his way and through the tobacco fields, get an education, and then show the best in being a strong black man. And some writers say, well, why do you have to emphasize black men? I think if all things were equal, I probably would not have to.
Mm-hmm.
So hopefully we're going in that direction where things are becoming more and more equal. But in 1955, it definitely was not equal. They saw Emmett, a 14-year-old, as a man. And I'm a mother. I see a 14-year-old as a 14-year-old teenager.
Right.
And so Emmett broke the custom of the day. You could not smile at a white lady. You would have to look away if you were walking. And he, being a child and trying to impress his cousins, was very foolish and lost his life because of it.
Brother Devery?
Yes, well, I think too, just remembering, just that the whole idea of context in that, we see this whole the post-Brown era, when the Brown decision outlawing segregation in public schools was handed down in May of '54. There hadn't been a lynching, I guess, at least a reported one in Mississippi since 1951. There was a kind of immediate backlash after that because with the Supreme Court now being perceived as a friend to Southern blacks, there was this backlash that we see with the murders of George Lee and Lamar Smith. Lamar Smith was lynched in Mississippi I think it was 3 weeks before Emmett Till was. It was in mid-August or early August 1955. He was an activist trying to get blacks to register to vote, and he was passing out literature in Brookhaven in the courthouse there, and was shot in front of witnesses, and his killers were never brought to justice, although there was an attempt to indict them. People wouldn't come forth and testify against them, and so they were let go shortly after. So there was this period where things had to get worse again before they would get better, and the focus of that really was the black electorate, because giving blacks power to vote, they saw the whole slippery slope, I think, with the Brown decision, and this is what, this whole outrage began anew. Not that it was ever gone, obviously. A young black boy doing what Emmett Till did, even before the Brown decision or just before, would have sparked this kind of outrage, but there was especially after Brown, we see passions running high. I think one of the defense attorneys for Roy Bryant and J.W. Milam, who were the ones who were tried for killing Emmett Till, they blamed Emmett Till's murder, one of them anyway, I can't remember which one it was, blamed the murder on the Supreme Court for handing down this Brown decision. So even they saw this as something that was inevitable with any attempt to give blacks equality.
I'll ask y'all, too. I think it's very important because we wouldn't know about this case at all. Number one is Dr. T.R.M. Howard not getting involved the way he did with his resources. And number two, the power of the press. I'd like to ask y'all, what was the pros and cons of the press getting involved in this case?
Well, first of all, I want to make sure that you all know that Dr. Howard, in order to bring this case forth, he wrote letters to J. Edgar Hoover, and they were put in the press. So Hoover even answered him, and so the press was always against this, so it was negative press. But the thing he was saying is, why is it that the FBI can't come and see about people being lynched in Mississippi? And so the press was I guess different, because in 1955 you did have black press like the Chicago Defender, and some of them did indeed come south and report what was going on in Mississippi. One of the biggest differences, I think, between Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks and then what went on in Mississippi is that in Selma and Montgomery you had television cameras, and you didn't have the cameras in Mississippi. And that made a big difference. So when the media started to report about Till and what was going on in Mississippi, it went all over the world. And the the whites, the power structure in Mississippi did not like it because they felt like it was bringing negative press to their beloved state of Mississippi, and that caused more problems.
Yeah, there's a new book that was published about a year ago called Emmett and the Mississippi Press. That's very good as far as examining how the Mississippi press dealt with this case. Early on, within the first few days after the kidnapping and murder, there was outrage over the murder in editorials, in articles in the white Mississippi press. And once Mississippi began to be attacked and run down by outsiders, and nothing upset Southerners more than outside agitation is how they viewed it. Once that began, especially with early comments with the NAACP and Emmett Till's mother attacking the state, even though they said nothing really more after those initial comments, those comments were played over and over and over or republished over and over and over to where it gave white Mississippians the impression that the NAACP and Emmett Till's mother were constantly attacking the state. There were just some initial comments, but they had a way to manipulate public opinion by printing those over and over, and then using images, and the images especially were powerful in shaping public opinion. One of the ones that stands out, or at least one of the articles that stands out for me, and how the white press dealt with this, is when Emmett Till's body was being viewed up in Chicago. There's a photograph of crowds, large crowds outside of the church where his body was lying and where people were filing by. The Mississippi press showed this crowd, which they were able to give the impression of mass protest and rumors of protests of this invasion of northern blacks coming into Mississippi to go after Bryant and Milam in their cells. That picture was juxtaposed against a picture of Milam and Bryant talking to one of their defense attorneys very calmly in the court prior to their indictment. It shows this crowd of blacks, and it shows the defendants very calmly consulting with their attorney. And so it gave Southern whites, especially Mississippi, this impression that things were out of control. There was hysteria up north, and people were going to come down south. And while Milam and Bryant are just very calmly dealing with their whole indictment situation. And so they were able to make friends in Mississippi and get sympathy just by how they were portrayed. And that was just one of several examples on how the Southern press dealt with this story after they got upset with this whole idea of outside agitation. I thought
it was interesting, like you said about the quote she did. She said, like, Mississippi going to pay for it. But how the press was, like, devilish and basically take it out of context, because she was talking about raising money to support the people of Mississippi who was investigating the case. But they decided to focus on, like they do today, you know, like we got the 24-hour news cycle. It'll be interesting to see how they would have handled it today, you know, versus how they handled it back then. Because, like, to me, it's a love and hate relationship with the press. Like, you know, I look at the fact that what we don't have now that we had back then, we had a strong black press. We had journalists. You know, we had real journalists out in the field. You had, you know, Pittsburgh Courier. You had the Tri-State Defender in Memphis and the Chicago Defender, all these papers who, you know, were sending folks down south to get the story and to get one side of the story. Then it was what Johnson doing what he did, publishing the photos, and yet, you know, how much of a bang would the case made? Would it resonated with the people? You know, black and white. Cause I think about the James Meredith University of Mississippi fiasco where they had a riot on campus. And what brought in a lot of clarity, I mean, the use of the media, but the fact that you had a European journalist getting killed, a French journalist getting killed by unknown persons on the campus. And now they're, in the process of erecting a memorial in his honor. But, I mean, you have, you know, the international media involved, and to have one that won't get killed. I mean, it brings a lot of emphasis. Even with the Mississippi burning case, if there was just James Chaney getting killed by himself or three black guys, would it got the kind of resonance with the media, with the nation that it eventually got?
Well, you have to understand, for newspapers, you selling papers is a business. So if you can sensationalize it, or if you can draw the public in where they want to see what's happening next, they want to see what's going on. And to be honest with you, I'm not so sure that sweet, easygoing news sell papers. So that has to have something to do with a journalist and how they decide to spin their stories.
Mm-hmm.
And I know early on people saw the Emmett Till, especially opponents of those who were sympathetic with Milo and Bryant, I suppose, saw the white press as sensationalizing, the black press as sensationalizing the case. I know not long after Emmett Till's body was put on display and those pictures were published, someone, I think it was a state legislator in Mississippi, wanted to get legislation passed that it would be illegal to show the body in the press for purposes of raising money. They saw this element of sensationalism, which others saw it as a necessary move to awaken the nation. And so there was, but yeah, either way, it sold papers and got the story out there. And
well, a lot of that, especially with the body of the child, had to do with Mamie Till Mobley. She wanted the world to see what they've done to my little boy. And that was her take. In fact, before she died, my husband and I interviewed her, my husband David Beto from the University of Alabama. So we have her on tape where we'd give an interview. And she talks to us about how the sheriff had already dug a grave. They were going to bury him immediately. And she said no. And she tells, we've got documentary in our book, how she ended up getting his body back to Chicago, and lines of people around street blocks waiting, 3 blocks, I think they said, waiting to see this horrific sight of this child after such a terrible beating. And so even though the newspapers were there, the mother had some say in how she wanted her son to be viewed in the papers because of what she would say and what she decided to do.
I had to ask y'all too, like, what type of person was Mamie Till Mobley? I mean, was she bitter? Was she forgiving? I mean, what type of person was she? I know both of y'all talked to her extensively.
Well, the thing that struck me more than anything else is that as she talked about the incident, you could hear her voice crack. You could hear the pain, as if she's crying, as if it happened yesterday. And so it was heartbreaking to hear her talk about how you could smell the body a block off before you even got close to it, and she didn't know what that stench was, and then to realize that was her son smelling like that, his body decaying, and how they wanted to cover it, and she wanted them, no, wash him off. I want to see what they've done to my child. And she takes it step by step of the body, how bad it looks. And even when we talk to her on the phone, my impression is that she believed, because it was such a horrific incident, she believed that the country wanted to hear, and she had a story to tell, and she wanted her son to be a hero. I mean, she says that on one of the little films where we have her speaking. I say we, but filmmakers who produce films, where she will say this. She will say she would rather, if he had to die like that, she would rather to remember him not just as dead, but as a hero.
It was awesome. Oh, Devery, you got anything to add? I know you talked to her a lot as well. You talked to her like a month before she died, correct?
Correct, yeah. And I think, I mean, that's really important to understand. And I think, too, when people see the footage of Mamie, at the time, Mamie Bradley, at the trial, the incident in the store happened on August 24th. He was kidnapped on the 28th, and his body was found on the 31st of August. The men went on trial on September 16th, so just a couple of weeks, just barely over 2 weeks after the body was found, these men went on trial. So Mimi was there, and you see the footage of her. She's quite composed and holding up well, and I just can't even imagine, at least what we're able to see. She's holding up well throughout this whole thing, and I've always thought about that and how in the world, just 2 weeks after her son was murdered, she's going down to this really hostile place towards her and having to testify and then having to live with that verdict just a few days after that. Very courageous and very composed at the same time. And I did ask her that very question, if she had any bitterness towards these men. And she told me that, thankfully, and her words were, thankfully, the Lord just took all of that out of my heart. She said, I don't feel love, I don't feel hate, I don't feel anything. Then she compared, her life to what, we don't know a lot about what happened with Milam and Bryant in the years after the killing, but we know some, and she was able to really contrast her life with theirs and realize that she went on to help, hundreds and hundreds of kids with the Emmett Till Players, a group she formed as a school teacher in Chicago. And we don't really hear much positive happening with the others, with the killers, although perhaps their families would say differently, but at least what we know there. And so I think just, her going on to be a blessing to society was a way for her to put this in a greater context and realize, yes, she sacrificed one, but she saved and helped so many other children. And the children she worked with the Emmett Till Players were kids who were at risk. And she helped several, and so she was able to view that in that bigger picture, and I think that helped her tremendously to see that there was a bigger work she was able to accomplish. Obviously, if she could have undone it and had her son, I think she would have, but she could have just been bitter and a recluse and just dealt with this privately, or even with the comfort of her family only, and allowed that to be her comfort. But she went on to help children, several of them. And several of them will testify that she, helped them get off the street, or they were destined for a life on the street. And some went on to become ministers and doctors and other professions. And so that's a kind of an untold story, really, about her life.
I mean, and it needs to be told more as well, because I think it's interesting, because people always say, well, justice wasn't done. But there's a thing called cosmic or universal justice I believe in, that things take care of itself. Like, these guys really did suffer. They both ended up dying from cancer. They both lost businesses. They lost their respect in their community. They had to leave. They're basically pariahs and outcasts. I mean, I was reading one article where Roy Bryan, this is back in, I guess, the 30th anniversary of the case. Roy Bryan was he owned a store in Jackson. I'm not in Jackson, but in somewhere in Mississippi. It was like, back then, it was patronized by black folks like it was when he killed Emmett Till. Majority heavily patronized by black folks. But he said something to the effect. He said, you know what? Don't tell nobody who I am, because these black folks are the same black folks like they was back then. He basically said, but then what's sad is they wasn't even aware of who this guy was, who they was patronizing.
Well, one thing about Milam and Bryant is that because of the time, they thought that they were upholding the honor of the white female, and if they were going to be heroes, they thought really that everybody would understand what they've done, and it was fine. And it may have started out like that, but once they decided to give testimony and admit to it, they later admitted to it, and when they admitted to it, white Mississippi turned away from them. Also, I think during the trial, when the mother gave testimony about her son, well, you had other mothers that had children, and so they saw things a little bit differently. So when they left the courthouse, the environment was not, I think, what Milam and Bryant had hoped for or had prepared for. Going in, she talks about the kids. It was festive. It's sort of like a festive thing. They were slapping their legs and popping guns and pointing at her and trying to frighten her. But after she gives her testimony, and Uncle Mose points to the two, these are the two that took him from the house, the atmosphere in the town had changed. And I think, when we talk about people are human beings, and we have something in common. You have mothers, you have children, And you can understand, I think, the anguish and the devastation a mother would feel when you hear her talk about her only son. She never had any more children. That was the only child she ever had.
Mm-hmm.
And so for them to hear that, it did make an impact. And if Mylan and Brian had just accepted their innocence, because that's what the jury said, they did not convict them, and had not said anything else, I think things may have been different for them. But they decided to give a story to, what, Look magazine, was it?
Yeah, Look magazine. You know what's funny? I know I was reading, Dr. Whitaker's thesis, which was a main source for a long time on the case, but he was saying to the effect that kidnapping or a murder charge carry like the maximum, which was either life in prison or the death penalty. Now, it would have been interesting to see if they would really send a white person to the chair or give them life in prison for killing a black person in the state of Mississippi. You think that would have happened if, let's say, if the outside agitators weren't agitating so much for justice? You think that could have happened possibly in that type of environment 54 years ago?
Well, I can't imagine it happening. I can't imagine it happening because society was different. People saw things differently, and even some of the jurors talked about it after the fact. They said that the only reason it took as long as it did because it was hot and they had some Coca-Cola or some soda that they were drinking to cool off. So I guess it's possible, but I can't see it. I may be wrong, but I can't see it.
Well, I think we can gauge that, too, a little bit from the case that happened a few months after the Till case, the case of Clinton Melton, who was shot by a white man at the gas station where Clinton Melton worked. There was lots of outrage over his murder. In fact, this happened in Glendora, Mississippi, and so the trial was held in Sumner a few months after the Till case with several of the same cast of characters, with I think some of the same defense attorneys, if I'm correct on that, who were defending Elmer Kimbrell, who was the one who shot Clinton Melton. He was acquitted as well. He claimed he shot Clinton in self-defense. Clinton's white employer testified. He was outraged over the murder. Incidentally, he was the defense witness for Mylan at the Till trial. Now he was the prosecution witness at this trial. He was outraged over this murder. The public was outraged. Several people several white people in the community brought food and stuff over to Mrs. Melton after the murder. They were outraged, and he wasn't somebody from the North. There were no Northern papers or agitators out upsetting people after this, but yet he was still acquitted in the same courtroom in Tallahatchie County. So I think we can gauge this a little bit. Had the Till murder been under the best of circumstances, if you can say that, without the outside agitation, I don't think it would have been any different just for that very reason. And here, they had eyes on them once again because here was their chance to do right after the Emmett Till case, to show the world that they're not racist or that they, would give a fair trial in a racist trial like this, where there were racial, elements to it, and they still didn't do it. So I don't think at all that the Till case would have ended any differently had there not been outside agitation.
No.
But,
go ahead,
one thing I'd like to interject, when we did, at Stillman College, we did the 50th anniversary of the Till murder, and we went into Mississippi. The people of Mississippi were wonderful to us. We did tours. We got out and looked at the cotton fields for the Northerners that maybe had not been into a cotton field. And it was a different environment than I think some would have expected. And, of course, it's 50 years. 50 years have passed. But I've been back several times over the years because we walked those dirt roads probably for 10 years or more getting information. And we even spent time with the plantation owner who has his own cotton gin in his yard, and he invited us in, and conversation was cordial and giving information. And so it is a different Mississippi now in some respects. I mean, it's still poor in some places, and people are still doing without. But the feeling, I think, was a bit different because growing up as a child, I heard people afraid if you're African American, you might not want to be caught in Mississippi after dark. And so I don't think that level of fear is still present. So I do think things are a little bit different than they were back in 1955.
I definitely do, 'cause I know that Tallahatchie County, they wasn't registered. No black person was registered to vote when Emmett Till got killed, and this time around they overwhelmingly went for Obama. You know, he didn't win the state, but that Tallahatchie County overwhelmingly voted for Barack Obama to be our next president. But I want to touch a little bit on that Melton case, because what I find fascinating is this, from what I read, is the fact that Melton's widow told Megger, hands off on this case. She said, keep away from this case of my husband. And the funny thing about Melton was, from all accounts from I get from white and black folk, he was a Negro that knew his place, quote unquote. He knew the understanding of the code of conduct that had to be in the Delta. You know, it was understood. And, you know, and people did reach out to the family, but, you know, his widow ended up getting killed under mysterious circumstances as well. I mean, she got into some type of car accident when she, you know, eventually drove her car, lost control of her car, and drove into a bayou. Her children were saved, but she ended up getting killed. And Megger really investigated that case. But when I thought about how they was staffing this case up, like, you know, with the media, how it was like, you know, portraying the NAACP and all these other entities, a recent comparison I could think of was the Jenna 6 case, where you had, like, Mamie Till had a falling out with the NAACP over speaking engagements, how much she wanted to get charged, and the NAACP was using it as a way to raise money for their organization, and they said she should do it for goodwill, from what I got from some of the perspectives on the case. And I thought about Jenna 6, we had this thing with Michael Basin, Color of Change, all these different organizations communicating with some of the members of the family of the people in Jenna 6. Like, I talked to Marcus Jones, he's a good friend of mine, the father of Michael Bell, and how he was portrayed in the media, how he was handling the case when, you know, he wasn't asked to be dragged into this case concerning his son, just like Mamie Till was not asked to be dragged into this mess, you know, concerning the death of her son. I mean, it really became a media circus. And then a lot of, I mean, it's like, you know, people lost focus on what this thing was really all about. You know, and in a lot of ways, we undo it. You know, we did a lot of damage ourselves.
Well, when you have people sensationalizing and energies are high, I think people may not respond like they ordinarily would. And it may be difficult sometimes to keep it cool, calm, and collected and together, because you have some people are doing things for various reasons. Mm-hmm. And so I think we'll have an effect on everybody. And, you know, when I look back at Mamie Till, when she's out going from place to place, there were times she wanted people to pay her. She thought that she was owed or she was due because of her suffering and what she had gone through. And so she had some problems with that as well, because a lot of places there were no money and could not pay her. So I don't know. That's difficult to say, because when you I'll give you a good example. If someone is making a movie of your life, and they have the credits to the movie, and they're going to make the money because they're making the movie or they're writing the book.
Right.
And then the person that they're writing about, if you don't have a contract, then you're not getting any money. It's the person that's actually doing the work. So you did have people who thought that someone else is making out like bandits and getting money off of this, and we're suffering, we're doing without, and they may feel like it's not right. Mm-hmm. And then you see the ugly part of greed, maybe. Is there a good-looking part to greed at all?
Only if it's done in moderation, I guess. I would say everything done in moderation is good. And we could debate on that all day and all eternity long. But Deborah, you got anything to add to that?
No, I think you said that well. That's what I would have said. I think of something like that as well. So no, nothing really to add. I think that said it just right.
Yeah, I will touch on something I think is very interesting because I'm very fascinated about this. It's like deals with the press and about the freedom of information and how people use certain things to shape up certain truths about people and events. What I was talking about is Lewis Till. Like the only way Mammy Till could identify her son's body was by the ring with the initials LT, which was for her late husband who died in World War II. And at first the press said, here's a guy who gave his life for his country, died bravely in Europe, and the war was like over in Germany, at least in Europe, a month after he died a month later after the war officially ended in Europe. And allegedly what happened was, from my understanding, is the fact that he allegedly, raped 3 white women and killed the third one. He got hanged in Italy. And my thing was this, like, here's a woman, Mammy Till, at the time was working for the Air Force, for an Air Force officer. She had access to all types of government secrets. But it's not, until that trial came about, the family was not aware of the details of her late husband's death. And how Senator James Eastland, Dixiecrat, the senator from Mississippi, used this as a reason to justify the lynching, the killing of Emmett Till. That, he's his father's son. And I'm thinking to myself, just talking to World War II veterans of color like my grandfather, my late grandfather, how he was demoted for certain things, just for, hanging out with white women and other stuff. And I was thinking, like, did he really get a fair trial? I mean, there was no DNA testing or flight forensics back then. So who's to say that he did the things he did? But other than that, how can you hold somebody accountable for something somebody else did and justify them, getting what was due to them, quote unquote? What do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think the whole idea of trying, because that story, went public between the murder trial and the kidnapping trial, or at least they tried to indict Milo and Brian on kidnapping charges in November of 1955. The grand jury wouldn't even indict them, and that case was more, they could argue that the murder case was circumstantial evidence that they had to go by. This case was the kidnapping case was pretty ironclad. They had the sheriff and others there testifying to that. But that jury, I think, was probably prejudiced somewhat because in the kidnapping one that they didn't even indict because the Lewis Till case came forward, and that's what the case that people tried to make, or at least planned in people's minds that, hey, look what Lewis Till did, it's like father, like son. And so they had that in the back of their minds, and I think that was certainly the intent behind those documents being released. And I understand that Senator Eastland from Mississippi was instrumental in getting those documents out there.
I mean, well, it was classified. Even she didn't know. She worked for the government, the military. I mean, the family did not know until they saw this in the papers, in the press.
Well,
I thought it was kind of like, it's like the Pat Tillman murder or something like that. Or Pat Tillman, what happened to Pat Tillman type of thing. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Well, I know publicly at the time and in her memoirs, Mamie says that she didn't know what the reason was for the Lewis's execution until it came out in the press. I think that she really did know, and the reason I say that is because after Lewis died, she married one of Lewis's army buddies about a year later. She never talks about this marriage. No one ever talks about it. She did, and this man's still alive, so I can't really give his name, but he was one of Lewis's army buddies. He was stationed with Lewis during in Italy when this whole thing happened. She married him in 1946. They were divorced around 1950, and she married Pink Bradley, and then she went on to marry Gene Mobley later on. This marriage is never mentioned by anybody. I found out about it from a couple of Emmett's cousins who were with him in Mississippi, and I did some research and found out that she had married him, and I found out from his army records that he was with Lewis when he was executed. So he knew about this, and it's inconceivable to me that he wouldn't have told Mamie about it. In fact, Wheeler Parker and Simeon Wright told me that he always talked about this, and he had a different version of why Lewis was executed, at least for the events surrounding his trial. They think he wasn't given, or he thinks he wasn't given a fair trial. But this man, this husband, knew without question the accusations, and I know he would have had to have told Mamie. But I don't blame her for not coming public with it, because it wasn't essential to the case at all. And at the time, she didn't think it would ever come forward or have any reason to come forward, and so she didn't mention in the trial that her husband, had this, that he was executed or anything. There was no reason to. I mean, it was not essential to the case at all. But once it did leak, I think some people were critical of her for not, coming forward with this sooner, and so I think she said she didn't know anything about it, but I think the evidence is very clear that she did. But again, that's kind of an aside. There was no reason for that case, the Lewis Till case, to even be brought up.
And I'm glad you brought up Reverend Wheeler Parker and Mr. Simeon Wright, because after the FBI went in and exhumed the body of Emmett Till, I talked to Reverend Parker, and he said that was closure for him, because remember, he was a teenager himself.
Right.
And he had seen Emmett before, and then to see him in the casket, it didn't look like the Emmett that he knew. And as a teenager trying to understand it all, he couldn't. And he said that when the FBI went back in and exhumed the body, it sort of put closure to it for him, that was Emmett.
We got a call on the line. I guess Dr. Young. I'm glad he's listening. Dr. Young, how you doing?
Good evening again, Ron and Dr. Beal. I looked at your bio while I was listening. I definitely want to stay in contact with you. My father's from Sumter County, Alabama, and as I told you earlier, I had the pleasure of knowing Mega. And Ron, I'm glad you brought up Emmett's father. But as I remember, it was also some other soldiers who were executed along with Emmett. And you had another guest who was scheduled to appear, whose father was a deputy sheriff or something.
Dr. Whitaker, next hour coming up.
Oh, okay. Well, okay, I'll continue to listen. Maybe I'm jumping the gun. But, Dr. Beto, my father's from Sumter County, Alabama, and I spoke at Stillman years ago. You were probably a little girl when Dr. Wynn was the president there. He invited me over to speak at a Martin Luther King celebration, and you were talking about how fearful you were of Mississippi when I was growing up after the murders of Attn Collins, Denise McNair, Cynthia Wesley, Carol Roberson. A lot of folks forgotten about Virgil Ware, a young black kid who was 13 years old riding a bicycle on September the 15th, 1963, getting shot by some white terrorists there in Alabama as well. So I've definitely learned a lot, and I look forward to continuing this dialogue in the future.
Pleasure talking to you.
Like I know I said an hour, so I don't want to abuse my time and privilege, because I think this is something that needs to be continued, and I would love to have you both back on to talk about some of the issues we didn't get to today, because there's so much ground to cover. Like Dr. Young said, there are so many things that are left out, and it's up to us to really document the people's history, to paraphrase how it was in. So, all right, in closing, I'd like Dr. Linda, Brother Devery, if y'all have any words or thoughts or wisdom to leave with our listeners, as well as to give your contact on what's the best way to reach you, and if you want to plug anything, this is the time to do it. Dr. Linda?
Yes, Stillman College, Tuscaloosa, Alabama, a wonderful HBCU, and the book is Black Maverick, T.R.M. Howard's Fight for Civil Rights and Economic Power, the University of Illinois Press.
And for me, you can just write me at Devery@EmmettTillMurder.com. That's DEVERY@EmmettTillMurder.com. I just want Dr. Beto to know that I have pre-ordered your book, and I cannot wait to get it. Everything I've learned about Dr. Howard, except for just, discovering him in the press, documents I've looked at regarding the Till case, everything I've learned about Dr. Howard, I've learned from the Betos, and I cannot wait to get my hands on their book. So.
And thank you for coming to a Till conference. I do remember, and we appreciate it. I really enjoyed you going with us to Mississippi.
Oh, that was a wonderful experience. We'll have to do it again before the 100-year anniversary. So.
I heard that. I would like to bring this up. I think it was Dr. Linda. We talked about this last week, and I had a chance to talk to Charles Evers, Medgar Evers' brother, and he's very much a proud Republican who went for Obama. And my thing about, when they said, well, Dr. King was a Republican. And you think about a lot of our people, I mean, we talked about the civil rights movement, how it began in Mississippi, like Reverend George Lee and Dr. T.R. Howard, all these guys own businesses and our perception of the Republican Party. So we think about the chairman right now of the RNC being a black man named Michael Steele for the moment. What is the thing about the Republican Party and black people?
Well, my take on it is it goes back to Lincoln and the Civil War. And Abraham Lincoln was a Republican. And so back then, I think blacks of the day associated that with freedom. And now I think Republicans are probably have an association with economics and money. It's the party of economic power, big money maybe. Mm-hmm. And so when people reach that status of, I don't know, I know a lot of African Americans who have wealth, and they are Republicans. And when I've talked to them, that's what they relate to me. But I'm not sure, because we've got blacks on both sides, and even libertarians as well.
Well, that's a topic for another day and time. I know. I like to we'll get deeply into this. Dr. Linda Balo, thanks so much for sharing your precious and valuable time and insight with our listening audience. A lot of people have been tuning in, been listening on their phones, hitting up the chat room and things of that nature. And I'll call you Doctor because you're an expert on this case as well. Dr. Devery Anderson.
Oh, well, thanks.
I know you're working on your problem with your dissertation right now. We'd like to thank you once again for being on the show, and we welcome you to come back, because I think it's so enjoyable to help people who are very passionate about the truth and about justice and reconciliation sit down and share food for thought, service, food for thought, and We All Be News and Radio. And in the words of the great Duke Ellington, we love you both madly.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
No problem.